Hey, welcome back to Throttle Tribe. So today we're counting down the top 15 Japanese adventure motorcycles. You know, the ones famous for their legendary reliability and engines that just seem to last forever. If you love bikes built to go the distance, well, you're definitely in the right place. Number 15, Suzuki DR350. Let's start with the lightweight legend that, honestly, nobody talks about anymore. The Suzuki DR350. This bike is what happens when engineers decide to build something that literally cannot break, then make it light enough that when you drop it, you can actually pick it up. The DR350 ran from 1990 to 1999, but its engine design dated back to the early 80s. This 349cc air-cooled single made just 30 horsepower. But that's not why you bought one. You bought it because this engine would run on hope and dirty oil if necessary. The design philosophy was beautiful in its simplicity. Make everything twice as strong as necessary. Then, remove anything that could possibly fail. The engine used a single overhead cam with rocker arms, no cam chain to stretch, no complex valve train to maintain. The cases were massive for a 350, borrowed from Suzuki's bigger bikes. The transmission was a wide ratio 6-speed that could handle anything from technical single-track to highway slogs. And here's the kicker. It weighed just 291 pounds dry. That's 100 pounds lighter than modern 300cc adventure bikes. There's a DR350 in Bolivia that's been used as a rental bike for Uyuni salt flat tours since 1995. It's covered over 200,000 miles across salt, sand, and mountains. The engine has never been opened. It starts every morning at 14,000 feet altitude, runs all day with tourists who can't find neutral, and asks for nothing but oil changes. The owner says he'll retire before the bike does. The electric start model, DR350SE, added convenience without complexity. The kickstart model, DR350S, removed the one thing that could possibly fail. Both versions used a Mikuni BST-33 carburetor that could be cleaned with a stick and harsh language. The air filter was a dual-stage foam setup that could be washed in a river and reinstalled. Adventure riders who've owned these report something unusual, and they actually get more reliable with age. The valve seats work harden, the piston rings seat perfectly, and by 50,000 miles, they run better than new. There are multiple documented cases of DR350s with over 150,000 miles that have never needed internal engine work. The downside? Highway cruising at 70 miles per hour makes it vibrate like a paint mixer. The suspension was basic even when new, and finding clean examples is getting harder every year. But if you can find one for $2,000 to $3,500, you're buying the most reliable lightweight adventure bike ever made. Number 14, Yamaha XT600. Before adventure bikes became luxury SUVs, the Yamaha XT600 defined what real adventure riding meant. This was the bike that crossed Africa when GPS meant got paper maps. It's the machine that created the blueprint every big single-cylinder adventure bike still follows today. From 1984 to 2003, Yamaha built variations of the XT600 with one goal: to create a bike that could handle anything, anywhere, with tools you could borrow from a farmer. The 595cc air-cooled single made 44 horsepower, not earth-shattering, but delivered in a way that made sense everywhere from sea level to 16,000 feet. The engine architecture was overbuilt to an almost comic degree. The connecting rod was forged from chrome moly steel and sized for an engine making twice the power. The piston was forged aluminum with a skirt design that minimized wear, even with huge tolerances for thermal expansion. The 4-valve head used a simple rocker arm system that could be adjusted with just a wrench and a feeler gauge. But here's what made the XT600 legendary: the Kickstarter. Even when Yamaha added electric start, they kept the Kickstarter because they knew that when you're in the middle of nowhere with a dead battery, that lever is worth more than gold. The engine would start in conditions that would make modern bikes throw error codes. Freezing cold, 2 kicks. Blazing heat, 1 kick. Haven't changed the oil in 10,000 miles. Still 1 kick. I met a German couple in Patagonia who'd been riding their 1999 XT600s around the world for 8 years. Combined mileage over 300,000 miles. Major repairs, 0. They had crossed Siberia in winter, the Sahara in summer, and everything in between. The bikes looked like they'd been through war, but the engines still started first kick every morning. The Tenere version added a larger tank and became the weapon of choice for Paris-Dakar privateers. These bikes would race 6,000 miles across Africa, get basic maintenance, and then do it again the next year. Many are still running today with the same engines that raced in the 1980s. The only weaknesses? The cam chain tensioner needed periodic adjustment, and the carburetor could be finicky at altitude if you weren't patient. But these were maintenance quirks, not failures. Parts are still available worldwide because Yamaha made millions of them and used the same basic engine in agricultural equipment. Find one today for $3,000 to $5,000, and you're buying a piece of adventure history that'll outlive modern electronics by decades. Number 13. Kawasaki KLR 650. First generation. The KLR 650 isn't just a motorcycle, it's a cockroach. Nuclear war could end civilization, and KLR 650s would still be running on radioactive gasoline, held together with zip ties and sheer determination. From 1987 to 2007, Kawasaki built the first generation KLR 650 after what must have been a single design meeting with one goal: make it run forever and cost nothing. The result was a 651cc liquid-cooled single that made 35 horsepower and refused to die under any circumstances. This wasn't cutting-edge technology, it was Stone-Age reliability wrapped in plastic bodywork. The engine was hilarious in its simplicity: one cylinder, two valves, one carburetor, one cam chain. The cooling system held enough fluid to cool a small car. The oil capacity was 2.6 quarts, massive for a single. The compression ratio was so low, it could practically run on kerosene if necessary. Every specification prioritized longevity over performance. The US military even bought KLR 650s modified for diesel fuel, the M1030 M1, because they needed something that could run on JP8 jet fuel. That's right, the engine was so under stress that converting it to diesel only required different compression and injection components. The military versions are still in service, with some logging over 100,000 miles in Iraq and Afghanistan's moon dust without a rebuild. But here's the real proof of immortality: the round-the-world riders. Conservative estimates suggest more people have circumnavigated the globe on KLR 650s than on any other motorcycle. There's a documented KLR in Australia with 380,000 miles. Original engine, original transmission. The owner has crossed every continent except Antarctica. His maintenance routine? Oil changes, valve adjustments, and occasionally hitting things with hammers. The KLR community has a saying: they run poorly longer than most bikes run at all. And it's true. Neglect them, abuse them, sink them in rivers, they keep running. There are KLRs that have been crashed, rebuilt with plumbing supplies, and kept going for another 50,000 miles. The infamous doohickey issue, a weak balancer chain tensioner, is the only real flaw, and a $50 upgrade fixes it permanently. Other than that, these engines seem immune to failure. They burn oil? Add more. Valves noisy? They're supposed to be. Low compression? They started that way. Prices range from $2,000 for ugly runners to $4,000 for clean ones. But pretty doesn't matter. Even the ugly ones have another 100,000 miles in them. Number 12. Honda XL600R. So, Honda looked at the enduro world back in 1983 and decided, hey, let's build a bike that could win Baja and still ride to work on Monday. The XL600R was their answer, a barely street-legal race bike that accidentally became one of the most reliable adventure machines ever built. The 591cc air-cooled single used Honda's RFVC, which stands for Radial 4-Valve Combustion Chamber. Basically, marketing speak for we figured out how to make power without stress. It produced 37 horsepower through a single K-hin carburetor, but the power delivery was so smooth and linear that, honestly, riders swore it made more. This engine would pull from idle to redline in any gear without a single complaint. What made the XL600R special was its race breeding without race maintenance. Honda used the same bottom end as their works motocross bikes, but detuned everything for longevity. The connecting rod was sized for 60 horsepower. The transmission gears were straight cut for strength. The clutch could handle twice the torque. They built a race engine, and then asked it to loaf along at trail speed. The dual-carb version of the XL600R was the hot ticket, but even the single-carb XR600R that followed became legendary. Baja racers would run these engines for 1,000 miles at race pace, change the oil, and do it all again the next year. Many privateer race bikes from the 1980s are still running the same engines today, now with over 200,000 combined miles of racing and trail riding. I know a trail guide in Colorado who's been using the same 1985 XL600R since new. It's covered 167,000 miles of Rocky Mountain single track, original bore, original valve train, original everything except consumables. He claims it runs better now than when new because, in his words, the engine has learned what it needs to do. The kickstart-only configuration definitely scared away casual riders but ensured that every owner became mechanically sympathetic. You learned to listen to the engine, to understand what it needed. That connection between rider and machine meant these bikes were maintained properly and honestly lasted forever. The suspension was easily overwhelmed if you weighed more than 150 pounds, and the brakes were more like suggestions than commands. But the engine, immortal. Find one today for $2,500 to $4,000, and you're buying Honda reliability in its purest form. Number 11. Suzuki DR650. The DR650 is what happens when Suzuki accidentally builds the perfect adventure bike engine, and then forgets to change it for 30 years. Since 1996, this engine has remained basically unchanged because, honestly, you just can't improve on perfection. The 644cc air and oil-cooled single makes about 43 horsepower, but Suzuki built it like it was meant for a generator, not a motorcycle. The engine cases are massive. The piston is forged with a 1970s-style skirt design that prioritizes longevity over lightweight performance. The connecting rod could probably be used as a weapon. Everything about this engine just screams, "I refuse to die." The magic lies in what Suzuki didn't do. There's no radiator to puncture, no water pump to fail, and no complex electronics to diagnose. The carburetor is a Mikuni BST-40 that you can rebuild on a picnic table with just a screwdriver. The air filter is a simple foam element you can clean in a gas station bathroom. Valve adjustments use old-school screw and lock nut adjusters that haven't changed since the 1960s. Adventure riders love the DR650 because it's just too simple to break. There's no computer to get confused, no sensors to fail, no limp mode to activate 1,000 miles from nowhere. It either runs or it doesn't, and it almost always runs. Even when it doesn't, the problem is usually obvious and fixable with basic tools. There's a DR650 in South America used for motorcycle tours that has over 240,000 miles on the original engine. It's been dropped off cliffs, sunk in rivers, and run on fuel that was mostly water. It gets a valve adjustment every 20,000 miles, whether it needs it or not, and it never does. Yet, it just keeps going. The owner jokes that he'll have to include it in his will because it'll outlive him. The aftermarket has solved every weakness. The seat that feels like plywood. Seat Concepts fixed that. The suspension that's overwhelmed by anyone over 180 pounds. Progressive Suspension sorted it out. The tiny tank? Safari makes a 6.6-gallon replacement. But the engine, nobody touches the engine because it's already perfect. You can find one new for around $7,000 or used for $3,000 to $5,000. Either way, you're buying the last motorcycle you'll ever need. It won't be the fastest, prettiest, or most sophisticated, but it'll still be running when everything else is scrap metal. Number 10. Yamaha XTZ750 Super Tenere. The original Super Tenere was Yamaha's answer to the Paris-Dakar Rally, which at the time was dominated by big twin-cylinder machines. But instead of copying everyone else, Yamaha built something completely different, a bulletproof parallel twin that could cross continents without drama. From 1989 to 1997, the 749cc liquid-cooled parallel twin produced around 70 horsepower through a pair of Mikuni carburetors. But the brilliance wasn't in the power, it was in the engineering. Yamaha used a 360-degree crankshaft that provided perfect primary balance, then added a balancer shaft to eliminate vibration. The result was an engine smooth enough for Autobahn cruising, yet tough enough for Sahara crossings. The engine was overbuilt to an almost absurd degree. The cases were sand-cast aluminum, thick enough to use as armor. The transmission used straight-cut gears for maximum strength. The clutch was a multi-plate wet design that could handle twice the engine's power. Even the radiator was oversized, capable of surviving Death Valley in August. What made the Super Tenere special was its racing success, without the need for racing-level maintenance. Yamaha won the Paris-Dakar Rally multiple times with barely modified versions of this bike. Then everyday riders bought the same machines and racked up 200,000 miles or more. The race technology trickled down without the race bike fragility. I once met a French rider in Morocco who had been living on his 1992 Super Tenere for 3 years, riding from Europe to Cape Town and back repeatedly as a tour guide. 180,000 miles on the original engine. His maintenance log was almost a comedy. Oil changes when I remember. Valve checks when it gets noisy. Air filter cleaning when it stops running. The bike looked like it had been through several wars, but the engine still pulled hard to redline. The 5-valve head design, 3 intake, 2 exhaust, reduced stress on each valve while improving airflow. Valve inspections were required every 15,000 miles but rarely needed actual adjustment. The cam chain had an automatic tensioner that actually worked. The only consistent issue was carburetor synchronization. Fiddly, yeah, but never a failure point. These bikes developed a cult following among serious adventure riders who really valued reliability above everything else. While everyone else was fixing breakdowns, Super Tenere riders were making miles. The forums are full of high-mileage stories. 150,000, 200,000, even 250,000 miles without an engine rebuild. Find one today for between $3,000 and $6,000. And you're buying proven Paris-Dakar technology that will outlive most modern adventure bikes by decades. Number 9. Kawasaki KLX 650. Kawasaki's KLX 650 is the adventure bike nobody remembers, which is exactly why it's perfect. While everyone was arguing about KLRs versus DRs, Kawasaki quietly built something better than both, then forgot to tell anyone. From 1987 to 1996, the KLX 650 used a liquid-cooled 651cc 4-valve single that made 44 horsepower. But here's the secret. It was basically a detuned race engine. Kawasaki took their desert racing technology, dialed it back by about 30%, and created an engine that would run forever at 70% capacity. The engineering was race-bred throughout. It featured double overhead cams driven by a gear train, no cam chains to stretch, and a forged piston that could handle twice the compression, pro-moly valves that belonged in a superbike, a 6-speed transmission with ratios perfect for everything from single-track to highway. This wasn't a dual sport, it was a race bike with a license plate. The frame was chromoly steel, TIG welded by craftsmen. The suspension used cartridge forks and linkage rear technology that wouldn't become standard for another decade. The brakes were twin piston calipers that actually stopped the bike. Everything about the KLX 650 was 5 years ahead of its time, yet nobody bought them. They were too expensive, too sophisticated, too good for their own good. Kawasaki killed it after just 10 years, making these the best-kept secret in adventure riding. Those who own them guard them jealously, knowing they'll never find another bike this good. There's a KLX 650 in Alaska used for backcountry guiding that has 140,000 miles of the roughest riding imaginable. Original engine still making full power. The owner has a spare bike for when clients break things, but the KLX has never needed backup. It starts at -20 degrees Fahrenheit, runs at 14,000 feet, and handles river crossings like a submarine with wheels. The gear-driven cams mean valve timing never changes. The liquid cooling keeps temperatures perfect regardless of conditions. The 4-valve head breathes well at altitude. Everything about this engine was designed for reliability in extreme environments. Find one for $2,500 to $4,500 if you can. Most owners won't sell at any price, knowing they've got something special. This is the adventure bike Kawasaki should have kept building. Number 8. Honda NXX650 Dominator. The Dominator sounds like a torture device, but it's actually one of the most civilized adventure bikes of its era. Honda took their XR650L engine, added street manners, and created something that could commute on Monday and cross continents on Tuesday. From 1988 to 2000, the 644cc air-cooled single produced 44 horsepower through a Keihin carburetor so perfectly tuned that many modern fuel injection systems still can't match its smoothness. The RFVC head design meant excellent combustion, good fuel economy, and emissions clean enough to sell in California, back when that actually meant something. But the Dominator's secret weapon was its split personality. It had 17-inch wheels like a street bike, but long travel suspension like an enduro. It had a steel frame strong enough for luggage, yet light enough for trail riding. It was the Swiss Army knife of motorcycles before anyone knew they wanted one. The engine was classic Honda over-engineering. The cases were borrowed from the larger XR motors, providing massive strength margins. The transmission was wide ratio, but with close enough gaps for street riding. The clutch was hydraulic fancy for 1988, and it never needed adjustment. Even the Kickstarter was retained as a backup, though the electric start almost never failed. European dispatch riders fell in love with the Dominator. It could filter through traffic, hop curbs, handle cobblestones, and cruise at Autobahn speeds. There are documented German courier bikes with over 300,000 kilometers of year-round abuse original engines still running strong. The adventure crowd discovered these later, realizing that 17-inch wheels meant tire choices were available anywhere in the world. The street bias meant comfortable highway cruising, while its dirt capability allowed for fire roads and mild trails. It wasn't the best at anything, but it was good at everything. I found a 1994 Dominator in Portugal with 187,000 miles. The owner had ridden it to Nordkap, around the Mediterranean, across North Africa, and through Eastern Europe. Original engine, original clutch, even the original exhaust. His only modification was heated grips. He claimed the bike was immortal and planned to leave it to his grandson, Prices are climbing as people rediscover these. $3,000 to $5,000 buys you Honda reliability in its most versatile form. Not the most exciting bike, but possibly the most practical. Number 7. Suzuki DR800S Big. Suzuki looked at the adventure market in 1988 and asked, what if we built something completely insane? The DR800S Big was their answer, the largest single-cylinder production motorcycle ever made. It was ridiculous, impractical, and absolutely brilliant. The 799cc air and oil-cooled single produced 54 horsepower and torque strong enough to pull tree stumps, but those numbers don't begin to convey the experience. This engine was a thumper of biblical proportions. Each power stroke felt like a contained explosion. The piston was the size of a coffee can. The connecting rod looked like it belonged in a tractor. Everything about it was massive. Suzuki's engineers faced one big problem. How do you make an 800cc single reliable? Their solution was elegant. Make everything so strong that the forces involved become irrelevant. The cases were sand-cast aluminum, thick enough to stop bullets. The crank was forged from unobtainium and balanced to perfection. The transmission used straight-cut gears that could handle 4 times the torque. The result was an engine that simply couldn't break. The massive flywheel effect meant it could idle at 200 RPM if you let it. The torque was so strong you could start in 3rd gear and never shift. The simplicity meant there was almost nothing to go wrong. It was too weird to die. Adventure riders who discovered the DR Big fell into 2 camps, those who got it and those who didn't. If you understood that this bike wasn't about speed but about character, you'd found your soulmate. The DR Big would lumber across continents at its own pace, drinking fuel like a camel rarely, but in huge quantities. There's a DR Big in South Africa that's been used for safari photography for 25 years. It's covered 210,000 miles of African dirt, carrying camera equipment worth more than the bike itself. The engine has never been opened. Its low-frequency torque doesn't scare animals. Its reliability means never missing a shot, and its character makes every ride unforgettable. The electric start was optimistic. It usually worked, but the compression was so high that batteries lived short, difficult lives. The suspension was overwhelmed by the engine's sheer weight. The seat seemed to have been designed by someone who hated humans. But that engine was immortal. If you can find one for $3,000 to $5,000, grab it. Only about 6,000 were imported to the US, and owners tend to keep them forever. It's not rational, but then again, neither is adventure riding. If you're discovering that the best adventure bikes are the ones nobody talks about, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community that values reliability over RAM mounts. Number 6. Honda XR-V 750 Africa Twin. The original Africa Twin wasn't just a motorcycle. It was Honda saying, we're going to build the perfect adventure bike, cost be damned. From 1990 to 2003, they did exactly that. The 742cc V-Twin produced 59 horsepower, but Honda built it like it was going into space. The 52-degree V-angle gave perfect primary balance. The 3-valve heads, 2 intake, 1 exhaust, reduced reciprocating mass. The gear-driven counterbalancer eliminated vibration. This wasn't just engineering, it was showing off. Honda won the Paris-Dakar Rally 4 times with the Africa Twin, then sold basically the same bike to the public. No dumbing down, no cost-cutting, no compromise. You could literally buy an Africa Twin on Monday, add numbers and sponsors, and race Paris-Dakar on Tuesday. Many privateers did exactly that. The engine featured triple cooling, air, oil, and liquid. The redundancy meant that even if one system failed, the engine would survive. The oil capacity was massive. The radiator was sized for the Sahara. The air filtration system used a 2-stage setup that could handle talcum powder dust. Everything was overbuilt for the worst conditions on Earth, but here's what made it special. Honda used a cassette gearbox. You could change gear ratios by swapping cassettes, like changing tapes in a Walkman. Going to the desert? Install wide ratios. Heading to the mountains? Close ratios. It was brilliant and simple. There's an Africa Twin in Australia that's been around the continent 17 times. The owner, a geological surveyor, has put 340,000 miles on it, accessing remote mining sites, original engine, original transmission, even the original clutch. He's adjusted the valves maybe 10 times total. They never actually need adjustment, but he checks anyway. The RD07 version, from 1993 to 2003, improved on perfection with better suspension and brakes, but the engine remained untouched, because you can't improve what's already perfect. These bikes have crossed every desert, climbed every mountain range, and survived everything Earth can throw at them. The only weakness was weight. 500 pounds wet was hefty for 1990, but that weight represented strength, reliability, and capability. When you're 1,000 miles from nowhere, you'll take reliable overlight every time. Prices range from $4,000 to $8,000, depending on condition and year. But condition doesn't matter much. Even the rough ones have another 200,000 miles in them. Number 5. Yamaha TDM 850. The TDM 850 shouldn't be on this list. It's not a proper adventure bike. No spoked wheels, no bash plate, no pretense of off-road capability. Yet more riders have crossed continents on TDMs than on almost any other motorcycle. Why? Because Yamaha accidentally built the perfect engine between 1991 and 2001. The 849cc parallel twin made around 78 horsepower through fuel injection on later models or carburetors on earlier ones, so perfectly tuned that many owners still prefer the carb versions over fuel injection. But the real magic wasn't in the power. It was in the delivery. The 360-degree crank provided perfect primary balance, while the balancer shaft eliminated vibration. The result was smoothness that made 500-mile days effortless. The engine was borrowed from Yamaha's racing program but detuned for longevity. The cases were sandcast with extra ribbing for strength. The transmission was a cassette type for easy ratio changes, and the clutch was overbuilt to handle twice the power. Everything about this engine said, "I'll run forever," and they did. The TDM 850 became the weapon of choice for European tourers who valued reliability over image. These bikes would cruise at 100 miles per hour all day on the Autobahn, then carve through alpine passes with sporting precision. They weren't adventure bikes, but they definitely had adventures. There's even a TDM 850 in Russia that's been used for motorcycle tours to Siberia since 1995. It's covered over 420,000 kilometers of the worst roads imaginable. The owner rides it through winters at minus 40 degrees Celsius. The engine has never been opened except for valve checks, which, remarkably, never need adjustment. He claims it's the most reliable machine he's ever owned. The 5-valve head design meant less stress on each component. Valve adjustments were recommended every 15,000 miles but rarely required. The cam chain had an automatic tensioner that actually worked. The only consistent issue was a weak charging system on early models, easily fixed with a modern regulator or rectifier. The beauty of the TDM was its versatility. It could tour, commute, sport ride, and even handle mild dirt roads. It did nothing perfectly, but everything well. The 17-inch wheels meant tire options were available everywhere. The shaft drive on some models eliminated chain maintenance, and the comfort meant you could ride all day. Find one for $2,000 to $4,000, and you're buying an engine that'll probably outlive you. Not a proper adventure bike, but properly adventurous. Number 4. Kawasaki KLE 500. The KLE 500 is the adventure bike that Kawasaki built by accident. They set out to make a budget commuter using the EX500 Ninja engine. Instead, they ended up creating one of the most reliable adventure engines ever built. From 1991 to 2007, the 498cc parallel twin produced 48 horsepower through carburetors, so simple that shade tree mechanics could rebuild it blindfolded. But the real genius was using a proven sport bike engine in an adventure chassis. This engine had already proven itself in millions of Ninja 500s, thrashed by new riders, crashed repeatedly, and often poorly maintained. It was pre-tested for immortality. The liquid-cooled design meant consistent temperatures anywhere from Death Valley to the Arctic Circle. The 6-speed transmission offered perfectly spaced ratios for everything, and the 180-degree crank delivered the character of a twin with the smoothness of a 4. It was the Goldilocks engine, just right for every situation. European riders soon discovered the KLE 500 was perfect for real-world adventure riding. It had enough power for highways, enough grunt for dirt roads, and reliability that made Africa twins jealous. Parts were available everywhere because the engine was shared with multiple models. You could rebuild it using Ninja components found in almost any junkyard. There's even a KLE 500 in Germany that's been around the world 3 times, 280,000 miles on the original engine. Its owner, a retired mechanic, chose the bike specifically for its reliability. His only modifications were crash bars and luggage. He claims it's impossible to kill and plans to ride it until he physically can't anymore. The real beauty was in what Kawasaki didn't do. No complex electronics, no exotic materials, no cutting-edge technology, just proven components, assembled correctly. The result was an engine that actually got better with age as tolerances settled and parts wore in together. The only real weakness was the suspension, which was barely adequate for the street, let alone true adventure riding, but the aftermarket solved that quickly. Everything else was bulletproof. The engine, transmission, even the charging system was incredibly robust. Find one for around $2,000 to $3,500, and you're buying Kawasaki reliability at its finest. Not the most exciting or the prettiest bike, but absolutely unstoppable. Number 3. Suzuki V-Strom 650, first generation. The first generation V-Strom 650, produced from 2004 to 2011, proved that adventure bikes didn't need to be agricultural to be reliable. Suzuki took their bulletproof SV650 engine, mounted it in an upright chassis, and accidentally created the perfect adventure machine. The 645cc V-twin produced 67 horsepower through fuel injection, so reliable that dealers joked they never saw them for service. But the real brilliance came from using an engine already proven in hundreds of thousands of sport bikes. The SV650 engine was known to run over 100,000 miles with nothing more than regular oil changes. Put that into an adventure bike and magic happened. The 90-degree V configuration offered perfect primary balance without the need for balancer shafts. Liquid cooling ensured consistent performance anywhere, and the simple fuel injection system kept everything smooth. No ride modes, no unnecessary complications, just perfect fueling every time. It was modern reliability without modern complexity. What made the V-Strom special was its versatility. It could tour comfortably at 90 miles per hour all day, handle fire roads and mild trails, commute in comfort and carry a passenger plus luggage without complaint. It did everything well enough that you didn't need anything else. There's even a V-Strom 650 in South America used for motorcycle tours that has logged 250,000 miles on the original engine, clutch, and even the original exhaust. It's been dropped off cliffs, sunk in rivers, and run on fuel that was mostly ethanol. Yet it still starts every morning and runs all day without drama. The engine's reputation for reliability became legendary. Forums are filled with high-mileage stories, 150,000, 200,000, even 300,000 miles without a rebuild. The only recurring issue was a weak charging system on 2004 to 2006 models, easily fixed with an aftermarket stator. But here's the real secret. Suzuki hasn't changed the engine since 2004. 20 years of production, and the basic design remains untouched because you can't improve perfection. They've updated electronics and added traction control on newer models. But the engine, the same bulletproof unit. Find a first gen for $3,000 to $5,000, and you're buying proven reliability. It won't win any beauty contests or off-road races, but it'll still be running long after other bikes have become memories. Number 2. Honda Transalp. The Transalp is what happens when Honda engineers get drunk and accidentally design the perfect motorcycle. It shouldn't work. A V-twin adventure bike with street tires and touring pretensions, yet it became one of the most reliable adventure platforms ever created. From 1987 to 2000, XL600V, and from 2000 to 2007, XL650Vi, Honda built these bikes with their trademark obsession for reliability. The 583cc, later 647C, V-twin produced a modest 50 to 53 horsepower, but it delivered that power flawlessly. The 50 sectigrain V-angle provided excellent balance, the 3-valve heads improved combustion, and the gear-driven counterbalancer virtually eliminated vibration. But the Transalp's real secret was its boringness. Honda deliberately made it uninspiring. No racing heritage, no cutting-edge technology, no flashy personality, just pure competence. It was the Toyota Corolla of adventure bikes. And that's exactly why they're immortal. There's nothing to break. The engine is understressed, the chassis is overbuilt, the suspension is basic but functional, and the brakes simply work. Everything does exactly what it's supposed to do. Nothing more, nothing less. European dispatch riders quickly discovered the Transalp was perfect for year-round abuse. It would start at -20 degrees Celsius, run all day in city traffic, cruise comfortably at highway speeds, and handle cobblestone streets with ease. There are documented courier Transalps with over 400,000 kilometers of year-round European mileage, original engines still running perfectly. I once met a Scottish rider in Morocco who had been living on his 1999 Transalp for 5 years, guiding tours across North Africa with 267,000 miles on the clock. The engine had never been opened except for valve checks, which never needed adjustment. His maintenance routine? Oil changes, and the occasional wash. He said it was the most boring yet most reliable bike he'd ever owned. The beauty was in the details. The valve adjustment used simple and foolproof screw and lock nut adjusters. The cam chain had an automatic tensioner that actually worked. The carburetor on early models, or fuel injection on later ones, was perfectly calibrated. Everything just worked. Find one today for $2,500 to $4,500, and you're buying Honda engineering at its most conservative and dependable. It won't excite you, but it'll never leave you stranded. Number 1. Honda XR 650L, and here at Island, the king of forever engines in the adventure world, the Honda XR 650L, a bike so reliable that Honda has sold the exact same motorcycle unchanged since 1993. 31 years of production with virtually no updates because you can't improve perfection. The 644 fine cc air-cooled single makes 40 horsepower through a chain carburetor. That hasn't changed since Bush Sr. was president, but those modest numbers hide the truth. This engine is immortal. Honda built it for Baja racing in the 1980s, then detuned it by 40% for longevity. The result is an engine running at 60% capacity that simply cannot wear out. The engineering is magnificent in its simplicity. Dry sump lubrication with a massive oil capacity. RFVC head design that promotes complete combustion. A forged piston that could handle twice the compression. A connecting rod sized for a $1,000 C engine. Everything is overbuilt to a degree that modern accountants would never approve. Here's proof of immortality. There's an XR6i50L in Alaska with 412,000 documented miles. Original bore, original valve train, original everything except consumables. The owner uses it for backcountry hunting, loaded with 300 lb of gear, riding through conditions that would destroy modern adventure bikes. It starts every morning, runs all day, and asks for nothing but gas and oil. The U.S. military bought XR650Ls for special forces because they needed they needed something that would run on any fuel, start in any conditions, and survive any abuse. These military bikes have been recovered from Afghanistan with over 100,000 miles of combat use, still running perfectly. But here's what really sets the XR650L apart: parts availability. Honda has made the same engine for so long that parts are everywhere. Every dealer has them. Every junkyard has a donor bike. You can rebuild one with parts from 3 different decades, and everything fits. In the year 2004, you'll still be able to buy parts for an XR650L. The simplicity is beautiful. Electric start with kickstart backup, air cooling that can't leak, a carburetor you can clean with a stick, valve adjustment with a wrench and feeler gauge. There's no computer to confuse, no sensors to fail, no error codes to diagnose. It either runs or it doesn't. And it always runs. I know 3 different riders who've taken XR650Ls around the world. Combined, they've covered over 600,000 m on these 3 bikes. Major repairs, 0. One rider crossed Siberia in winter, the Amazon in the rainy season, and the Sahara in summer. The Pacers on the same trip. The bike never missed a beat. The suspension is overwhelmed if you weigh more than 170 lb. The seat feels like sitting on a roofing shingle. The stock tank gives you maybe 100 miles if you're lucky, but the aftermarket has solved every one of these issues. And that engine will outlive your grandchildren's grandchildren. Find one new for $7,000 or used for $3,000 to $5,000. Condition doesn't matter. Even the most abused XR650L has another $200,000 in it. This isn't just the most reliable adventure bike engine ever built. It might be the most reliable engine, period. And these 15 Japanese adventure motorcycles, that last forever. Did we miss one that deserves a spot? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe for more motorcycle content, and as always, ride safe. See you in the next one.